Money doesn't exist. If you've got a £50 note in your hand, what actually is it worth? I can buy goods and services with it. But what really is it that you hold in your hand? Because it's only worth something because the government says that it is. But the Bank of England, that's owned by the government, could decide tomorrow that there's a new £50 note. And suddenly the old one is utterly worthless. So the big question is, what is money? It's a tool that can be used for exchange, but the very thing that we work so hard to save up is going to become completely extinct. Let's go back to the barter system. If you go back as far as we can find records of civilization, money didn't exist. If you wanted something, you'd have to trade it for something else. And this is called bartering. Go and collect water for me and I'll make you dinner. Or if you wanted someone to train your horses and you've got 10 horses, you say, hey, train my horses for me, please, for a year. And at the end of the year, you can have one of them. So you're bartering. And the barter system has a beautiful simplicity about it. But the problem comes, maybe you want someone to go and fetch water from the river, but they don't want you to cook them dinner because what they actually need is wood, which is where commodity money comes in. In the same way that different countries right now have different currencies, when we look back thousands of years, we see that different villages and different countries had different commodity money used for exchange. This is where a group of people would agree on a commodity, a common commodity that was generally accepted as money. So for example, chickens. This is a very common one. Chickens lay eggs and the eggs can be eaten. Chickens keep pests away by eating them. And ultimately, chickens can be eaten themselves. So chickens are a good common commodity that people can generally agree, we'll take that. Even if you don't need or want more chickens, you could take them just to purchase other goods and services with, because chickens became money. Chickens served a new purpose altogether now. They were the new common commodity. We see commodity money even used today in many places across the world. Like in prisons, money can be cigarettes. This is used as a medium of exchange. They're in demand, hard to replace. You can't make cigarettes yourself. And even if you don't smoke, enough people do in order for cigarettes to be accepted as the medium of exchange. That's how we got to gold, precious metals. Around 2,600 years ago, 600 BC, precious metals were introduced first as money in ancient Lydia, now known as Turkey. They previously, before that, used shells, but gold and silver were agreed to become the new money due to the fact that gold and silver are beautiful, dense, a lot rarer than shells and more durable than shells. It made sense to use this as the commodity. And ancient Lydia was known for its rich resources in gold and silver and became the very first civilization to use coined money, like gold coins. The idea quickly spread across the world. It first went to Greece, where various city-states began minting their own coins and became a very successful way for people to exchange goods and services. And whilst gold can't be broken per se, it can easily be melted and split into smaller units. And once popularized by Greece, many other countries came to the same concept, including Persia, China, India, each developing their own version of metal coins. Even today, gold coins are known as God's money, and they're very valuable today. And if you own gold 1,000 years ago, even to this day, it's held its value and it's kept up with inflation. Whereas all the other commodity monies, like we talked about, cows and grain and cattle, there's either expired or died or broken or just completely extinct. And down the line, 100 years today, the British pound is going to be extinct like cattle, dead. So the conclusion is, what is money? It's a medium of exchange, but the thing that we call money today is going to become extinct. This is their plan in the Great Reset. Your cash will become worthless. And many rich people to this day will become poor instantly when the government or the society just suddenly decides, actually, the British pound doesn't hold any value anymore. We don't use that anymore. Now everything's on blockchain. Now the government have got their and that's why it's important to prepare for the Great Reset that is coming. The first ever bank recorded was in ancient Babylon around 2000 BC. This was before money as we know it, and the common currency was grain. The purpose of this bank was to store people's grain and other precious items safely. Rich people, who were obviously not living hand to mouth, would store up so much money that it wasn't feasible or sensible to keep it at home in case of theft. Therefore, the first ever bank would look after it free of charge. The bank was started by a religious temple that was trusted in the community, and they were smart. All deposits made to the bank were written into a contract and ingrained into clay tablets to ensure safekeeping. The bank would then lend grain to other families that needed it for business and trade, of course with contracts, and most importantly, with interest. If 20 people each deposited 100 kilograms of grain, the bank was now storing 2,000 kilograms of grain. It could then loan out 500 kilograms of grain with a promise to get it back with 100 kilograms of interest. And the bank knew that it was very unlikely that everybody would demand their grain back at once. So it was making 100 kilograms of grain for doing very little. It became the middleman. The bank was using other people's grain to make grain for itself. As money moved to metal coins, such as gold, silver, more banks became established as a safe way to hold money, but also as a way to borrow money. The concept of banking is a very clever way to make money. If people can't afford to pay the interest on their loans, then you legally get to take away their houses. It wasn't long before the Republic of Genoa started their own formal bank in Italy, which was the first government-owned bank in the world. This bank was called the Bank of San Giorgio. Paper money. Paper money is not real money. It was intended to be treated like an IOU. Instead of withdrawing your physical gold, you could withdraw paper notes instead. At any time, you could ask the bank to switch your paper note, IOUs, into physical gold. The maximum amount of IOUs, banknotes, you could physically withdraw would not exceed the amount you actually had in gold. This was convenient for shopping and exchanging goods, meaning you had liquid cash, paper, which was speedier. It was a quicker process than weighing gold and making trips to the bank for day-to-day transactions. As time went on, people became comfortable using banknotes instead of trading physical gold, and confidence in paper money became stronger and stronger. The Great Banking Scam. Stockholm's bank realized that they could make interest from loaning out paper banknotes instead of having to loan out gold itself. Banknotes had somewhat replaced gold when they were intended to be an IOU. The bank could print as many banknotes as they pleased and began printing more cash than they actually had in gold reserves, on the assumption that not all the issued notes would be redeemed at once. Some outspoken members of the public began to question the value of the banknotes and whether they were even properly backed by gold. This led to many people quickly withdrawing their physical gold from the bank, but the bank couldn't cope with this and so began making it difficult to access the gold. This led to public outrage, and the general public lost trust in the bank and demanded their gold back at once, leaving the bank with no choice but to declare bankruptcy, and the paper notes became worthless overnight. Johan Palmstruch, the founder of the bank, was prosecuted and found guilty of fraud. The Swedish government initially had him sentenced to death, but he ended up just being locked up in prison. That was enough to prevent anybody from ever wanting to start a bank again and over-leveraging. Ironically, the Swedish government took over Johan's bank, and that bank is still running today, and even more ironically, makes its money from over-leveraging in the exact same way that Johan did. If everybody in Sweden demanded their money, the bank would go bust. I doubt anybody would go to prison though, because after all, it's the government. Conclusion: the bank's agenda is to make money for themselves. They are often owned by government or extremely rich elitists with a complete monopoly over our hard-earned cash. Do not blindly trust the banks with your money. They make money from our money, and they don't benefit when we learn to invest our money ourselves. This is why the resounding message from the government and the banks is to work hard, save money, and store it safely in the bank. But beware, the Great Reset will mean that cash is worthless. I've been investing in property now for 17 years. I've done hundreds of deals, and I'm going to be running a completely free online training session showing you the steps of how to successfully get into property. If that sounds interesting, then join me. Click the link somewhere around this video, and I look forward to seeing you there. The banks have spent the last few hundred years building trust with the public. Stockholm's Bank, the first bank to ever give you banknotes, only lasted a few short years before the general public sussed it out. It didn't go bankrupt because it printed too much money. It went bankrupt because the people lost confidence in its paper money and demanded their gold back. Thereafter, banks ensured that they would only give out banknotes that they could match in gold reserves, meaning you could fully trust your paper money because it was backed by gold. Governments began establishing their own central banks. The first one was the one in Sweden, shortly followed by the Bank of England in 1694. There are now many central banks such as the Reserve Bank of Australia, the European Central Bank, the Reserve Bank of India, the Bank of Japan. These are all relatively new banks created in the last 100 years or so. A central bank is very different from a regular bank. Central banks are the only banks that have the authority to print money. But of course, they always promise to never print more IOUs than they have in reserves. Banknotes have to be backed by gold. During World War I, within 4 short years, the UK went from being £650 million in debt to over £7 billion in debt. This went from a manageable to completely out of control amount of debt. The British government desperately needed to fund military equipment, and it borrowed billions from the British public to do so. Once the war was over, the UK went into a Great Depression, which is the worst form of recession a country can be in. On September 21st, 1931, the Chancellor of Exchequer, Philip Snowden, announced that the UK was going to be temporarily coming off the gold standard. This was not voted in for by the public. It was not debated in Parliament. It was a swift and urgent response to an immediate financial crisis, as they said. The Bank of England then printed billions of pounds, never paid off its debts, and refused to ever come back on the gold standard. The central banks are printing hundreds of billions of pounds and giving them straight to the government to do as they please. Finance wars that we don't want, pushing questionable agendas in school curriculums, and paying their fat cats huge salaries. We pay an absurd amount of money to the government in taxes, but they still continue to print more and more money. Just because you're in a huge amount of debt like the government are, it doesn't mean that you're in a weak position. The reason they print money is not to pay off the debt, but to make the debt smaller as they decrease the value of money. Let me explain. The more money that is printed, the less value that it has. If £20 can buy you a full tank of petrol, when they print billions of pounds worth of money, suddenly your £20 will only get you a half tank of petrol. This is why the government prints so much money. The UK is in trillions of pounds worth of debt, and it has no intention of ever paying this debt down. Does this sound far-fetched? Well, take a look at what happened to Greece in 1944, Hungary in 1946, China in 1949, and more recently, Zimbabwe in 2009. I remember going to Zimbabwe shortly after they decided to scrap the Zimbabwean dollar. I got into a taxi and the driver said that would be 10 million. And at first I thought he was joking, or maybe he was trying his luck because it was my first time in the country. My now wife, Amanda, smiled and said to me, yeah, 10 million Zimbabwean dollars, that's the equivalent to about £5. There were people going to the markets to buy groceries with wheelbarrows of money, only to be told, yeah, we don't really want that money anymore. People who spent their lives saving these paper banknotes were now suddenly destitute because they had relied on the government's fake money. Let this be a warning. The same thing is happening in the UK and in the USA. Their plan is to scrap paper money altogether across the world as we enter into the Great Reset. Most money printing is done using quantitative easing. They deliberately make it extremely complicated so that even economic students are confused. Quantitative easing is where they pump more unbacked fake money into existence from nowhere and circulate it into the economy, bringing down the value of money and forcing up the prices of everything else. Fractional reserve banking. Standard bank protocol is to invest 90% and keep just 10% in reserves, just in case. One day I remember logging into my online banking, just staring at my £1.9 million bank balance. It was surreal. Is this really what I'd worked so hard for? I walked into the bank nervously because I knew that what I was about to do was going to cause a stir. Please, could I make a withdrawal? The lovely lady at the bank replied, of course you can. How much do you need? 1.9 million, please. And she gasped and said, let me go and find out. Then a more senior lady eventually invited me to go and have a chat in the back. She looked at me dead serious and said, we don't have it. And in that moment, the penny for me just dropped. She was serious. They don't have it. Fake loans. When I was 18 years old, I viewed a small terraced house in the West Midlands that would make a perfect property investment. The agent said I just needed to provide £13,000 proof of funds and they would take the property off the market. The house I'd secured would be making far more than 10% return on investment, so it made sense for me to get a loan to buy it. I excitedly rushed to my bank following the optimistic conversation with my brother and asked to speak to somebody regarding a loan application. They treated me very respectfully and promptly sat me down with a gentleman in charge of giving out bank loans. I told him that my credit was good. I just needed £13,000. I'd naively prepared a visual presentation, but the man didn't want to see anything. He just seemed ready for business. He said, what's the loan for, please? I said, it's for a property investment. The man looked disappointed, as though he'd just lost a sale. He shook his head and said, I'm so sorry. The property market is far too volatile, and on this occasion, we cannot lend. Boom. Loan declined. I was gutted. I went back home and asked my brother, what did you say that your loan was for? He replied, I told them it was for a holiday, and they approved it instantly. When the banks loan you money, it isn't real money. It is literally digits on a screen. But if you don't pay it back with real money and real interest, they will charge you interest on your interest. They'll tell you property is too volatile, so they can't lend. When everyone knows they themselves invest heavily into property. The system is rigged, so you will work until you die. The rich elitists need you to be poor. I know many super rich individuals and corporations. I'm not talking about millionaires. I'm talking about billionaires. Most of them aren't bad people. However, they don't want you to be rich. And the reason for this is simple. They need workers. If everybody was a millionaire, it'd be extremely difficult to find good employees. The poorer you are, the harder you'll work. And they'll pay you just enough for you to not leave. Just enough for you to give up on your dreams. I know many super rich individuals who encourage their workers to make poor financial decisions on purpose in order that they'll need the job even more and will be forced to work longer hours. And whilst this is disgraceful, I am even guilty of similar elitist behavior of this trap myself. Nobody's perfect and human nature can be wicked. I'll give you an example. I'm wealthy. And I'm a strong believer in building a personal brand. And I document many aspects of my business life on YouTube. And I was doing a social experiment on YouTube with a poor man. I decided to live in his house and work with him on his new business to enable him to become rich. I was having to use all the tricks I'd learned from when I started out in business myself because this man had zero money. In fact, he was in bad debt and had recently been made redundant. Whilst I was working with him, my videographer, one of my employees, captured everything and made it into a powerful documentary. This documentary got millions of views and attracted thousands of new investors to my database. However, there was a problem. Upon completing the documentary, my videographer, my employee, who'd been there, who'd seen it and filmed it, requested a week off to go on holiday. She wasn't really going on holiday. She wanted to reenact the exact strategies that we had just filmed. And I suspected she'd be doing this. And I was unhappy about it, as it had taken me a long time to find her, and she was a great videographer. And within a month, she sent me a letter of resignation. It said, "Dear Samuel, thank you so much for the opportunity to be your videographer. I've very recently built up a small property portfolio that is making me a passive income that is considerably more than the full-time salary that I currently receive as a videographer." And upon reading the letter, I was pretty furious. After all, I don't pay people a salary to teach them all my secrets of becoming wealthy. She should have been concentrating on her job and preparing for the next documentary rather than leaving me in the lurch and using my strategies as the reason to leave. This was outrageous. The truth is, she did absolutely nothing wrong. She didn't join the company with ulterior motives, but she'd have been mad not to implement the knowledge she'd learned on the job. And after seeing me make thousands of pounds from scratch in a single hour, again and again and again, it's very difficult to then be content making a regular salary. And I became convicted because I realized I was becoming no different from the rich elitists who deliberately keep people financially illiterate because they need workers. So I made a decision that instead of being angry when people would leave me because now they're financially free and don't need to work, I'd celebrate. And some people just don't have the appetite or desire to start their own business or to get into property investment, and that's fine. They're happy to be paid well and do a job they love, but others will want to give it a go. I've had several videographers leave my company to go and do property. I mean, you made more money than you could possibly dream of, which I'm blessed to have comfortably achieved. There has to be a new high. For some people, the new high is charity. For others, it's obsessing over their net worth for a higher sense of self-worth. And I've decided that for me, my new high is enabling as many people as possible to be financially free. My personal goal is to help more people become financially free across the planet than any human has ever done before in history. When I die, I want them to build a statue after me. I want my life to count. I know I'll never be remembered for the millions of pounds that I've made, but I will be remembered for the amount of lives I've impacted. Conclusion. The super rich control the world. They have economic power, political influence, own the media, and often bribe the governments. This is not a theory. These are facts. They are also humans with human nature and can be wicked. It doesn't logically make sense for them to allow you to be financially educated and wealthy. Therefore, expect to be persecuted by brainwashed sheep when you decide to become wealthy. They trust the government. They trust their paycheck. They trust in fake fiat money. They follow the narrative. You do not. But when you become wealthy, don't become bitter towards them. Help them. Don't become an elitist yourself. Find a mission bigger than yourself. And this is why you will sleep well at night, albeit in your mansion. The World Economic Forum is a rich group of elitists across the globe who have secret meetings together with a mission to, quote, engage business, political, academic, and other leaders of society to shape global, regional, and industry agendas, end quote. The World Economic Forum was founded in 1971 by Professor Klaus Schwab, and its members include Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, the president of China, Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, and around 1,000 other members who are mostly billionaires. It really begs the question, what on earth is their agenda? Much of what is said in their meetings is behind closed doors, but the only real way to know is to become a member. And that's the reason I decided to apply for membership. The cost to become a member is £500,000 per year. My plan was to listen, learn, and then decide from my own findings what is the real agenda from the world's wealthiest people. I'll then be in a position to share with the rest of the world what was really going on in the world and use it to help my mission of preparing people to become rich themselves. So I applied, and the World Economic Forum gave me an application form to complete. The very first question was, what's the size of your organization? The very bottom of the pecking order, the lowest option to choose from was less than £99 million. I'd never felt so broke. I was at the bottom of the food chain. It goes to show the caliber of companies, considering anything less than 99 million is the lowest of the food chain. I completed the application form in a professional and neutral manner, agreeing to pay the £500,000 enrollment fee. It was interesting that they refused to take my money and did not accept my membership application. I never got an explanation, therefore I can only conclude that not only do you have to be extremely wealthy to be a member, but you also have to be in the clique, sharing their beliefs and following their code. The World Economic Forum released an advert in 2016 outlining their agenda and preparing the everyday person for a shift in expectations, where the world would be in 2030 and beyond. The advert was called 8 Predictions for the World in 2030. The advert made me feel sick to my stomach, and I couldn't believe what I was watching. The first prediction was, you will own nothing and be happy about it. A young, weak-looking man who was smiling but had a sad look in his eyes. This was literally produced and broadcast by the World Economic Forum. Other points included a world where we don't eat meat, we produce organs in labs, we're forced to move house because of climate change, and we will lose our Western values. It was like an expose on the World Economic Forum where they published it themselves. And this led to many members of the public being outraged but unable to do anything about it. Those that spoke up were either branded a conspiracy theorist or were deplatformed and shadow banned on social media. I made a YouTube video about this advert and it gained over 800,000 organic views within a few days, but then suddenly, boom, was shadow banned and lost all traction. Why was it shadow banned? Who shadow banned it? What community guideline did it break? Many celebrities endorse the agenda created by the World Economic Forum. They're either paid to do so or live in fear of being cancelled. Many celebrities are reliant on sponsorships, social media ad revenue, brand deals, and paid promotions. I don't care about any of these things because that's not my business model. I'm not an influencer with a business. I'm a businessman with influence. I'd go as far as to say that if many celebrities en masse are all supporting an idea, it's probably a bad idea. Many of these celebrities are wonderful people. Many of them are my friends, and I know what they truly believe because they talk to me behind closed doors. The message they share publicly is often very contrary to the one that they share privately. I don't even blame them. Who wants their bank closed down or to be shadow banned on social media or lose all their sponsorships? In 2024, there were thousands of people complaining that they had been debanked with no reason given at all. The problem with this is that there's not only a small number of banks to choose from, but they're often owned by the same people. NatWest Bank is part of 7 large other banks, including Coutts Bank. Nigel Farage, leader of Reform Party, was famously or infamously debanked from Coutts Bank. Do you think he could have just gone with NatWest? Of course not. They're owned by the same people. I spoke with Nigel Farage personally over a lunch about this, and he was thinking he might be forced out of the country because every single bank was refusing to open him an account because they just didn't like him. Now, you might think, that's funny because you don't like Nigel Farage. And whilst I don't agree with many of his views on immigration and the like, he's not alone. 140,000 small businesses were debanked in the UK last year. Without a bank account, you can't make or receive payments. You can't run a business. Nobody should be debanked without a serious reason. And the bank shouldn't have a monopoly with so much power. When the billionaires tell us, you will own nothing and be happy, what they're really saying is, we will own everything and be even happier. And their defense to that ridiculous, spooky statement was that ownership will become a thing of the past and leasing will become more preferred. For example, DVDs and CDs and things like that are going to become extinct. We won't need to own DVDs because now we have Netflix and we just lease an account subscription. In the same way, it's becoming harder and harder to get on the property ladder, and renting is becoming the more normal option for today's generation. Own nothing, lease everything, and be happy. But there's a huge problem with that because you can now be cut off at any minute from everything. Similarly to how Netflix decided it would no longer supply Netflix to Russians. Another flaw in this logic of owning nothing is that in order for the world to function, somebody must own it. So who will that be? The rich people, of course. They'll own the houses. They'll own the subscription models, the farms, the food, the land, the business. Meanwhile, you and I will lease it and will be a reliable, lucrative customer, wholly reliant on the services you rent. And if you step out of line, bang, you'll get deplatformed and cut off from everything. This is about not just ownership, but also complete control. I don't think the World Economic Forum is a group of sadistic people who enjoy hurting people. I think it's an elitist group of billionaires who are trying to dominate the world to grow their own empires. And when money becomes no object anymore, complete control and domination becomes the new high. Very interesting that Bill Gates, member of the World Economic Forum, owns more farmland in America than any other person on the planet. And Bill Gates says, quote, I've invested in these farms to make them more productive and create more jobs. There isn't some grand scheme involved, end quote. And I like Bill Gates. I respect him as a businessman. I'm sure we'd get along just fine if we had a lunch. But he's part of the World Economic Forum, which is promoting owning nothing. Meanwhile, he and other members of the forum have a complete monopoly, not only on land, but also on food supply with farms. In 2021, a new company started called Citra Living. This is a company that's swiftly buying up as much residential property in the UK as it possibly can. And Citra Living's goal is to become the UK's largest landlord. Meanwhile, Lloyds Bank refused to loan me money to invest in property because it was far too volatile, remember? But who owns Citra Living? You guessed it, Lloyds Bank. Lloyds Bank's famous slogan is, by your side. They're definitely by our side, I'll give them that. They stand by our side when they tell us to save our money and invest it safely in the bank, and then they use our money to buy properties, becoming the biggest private landlords in Britain, and then rent those properties back to us. Genius. It also goes without saying that Lloyds Bank Group is also a member of the World Economic Forum, and the majority of leading banks such as Barclays, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and HSBC are too. The next time you get accused of being a conspiracy theorist, ask the person accusing you, what's the difference between a theory and a conspiracy theory? A theory is based on fact. It's not a conspiracy theory. The very term conspiracy theory was created by the government to label and discredit the people who are simply asking the difficult questions to them. Isn't it interesting? Conclusion, the World Economic Forum is hell-bent on ensuring you will be happy with nothing. Meanwhile, they're buying up the planet. And they need you and me as customers and consumers and workers and slaves. And if you challenge them, you'll be deplatformed and banded a conspiracy theorist. These are not theories, these are facts. Quick one before we get back to the video. It'll be wrong of me to not tell you about some online training that's coming up very soon, showing you exactly how to get started in property. Even if you've got no money, got no experience, I want to show you everything. The best part is it's completely free. Check the link in the description and I'll see you on the other side. Anyway, back to the video. Where is the best place to protect your money against inflation and the resetting of fiat money? Most rich people will not tell you where they store their wealth. It's quietly hidden away. They don't need a target on their back. If they talk about their wealth, they're going to attract expensive lawsuits, tax investigations, unwanted media attention, and public scrutiny. There's also risky territory telling people exactly where to store your money for safety reasons and also legal reasons. And it's against the law to give financial advice without being registered to do so. So right now, I will reveal exactly where I'm personally storing my wealth. This is not financial advice and is simply my own findings from my own experience. It's imperative you have your wealth as protected as possible and are as prepared as possible as you can be for the inevitable Great Reset. Gold, God's money. As they print more money, it loses value. But they can't create more gold. Gold has been with us since the beginning of time and will be here until the end of the earth. As I speak right now, 1 gram of gold is worth 62 pounds. That's a measly amount of gold though. To put it into perspective, £1 coin is 453 grams. Therefore, a small golden coin might cost around about £2,000. When golden coins were used as money in the 1400s, a £1 coin would literally be worth £1. Today, even our coins are fake because they're just polished to resemble gold. Real gold is accepted as a medium of exchange, and I can never envision gold becoming worthless. On average, it increases in price by around 10% per year, which historically has generally beaten the rate of inflation year by year. During the economic downturns and uncertainty, gold usually appreciates as people rush to put their money into something more stable. You can easily trade it for any other form of payment at any time quickly. It also has its disadvantages. If you owned a company that's worth £1 billion, it'll be far harder to physically steal that company because it's not a physical commodity that can be stolen. Whereas gold can absolutely be stolen. During the Great Depression in 1933, the USA's President Franklin D. Roosevelt prohibited ordinary citizens from owning gold and made it completely illegal. There was no vote or debate in Congress about it, and the people of the USA were only given 1 month's notice to deliver all of their gold to the Federal Reserve Bank. And the reason was to relieve pressure on the banks. Anybody who refused to deliver up their gold was given a 10-year prison sentence. Meanwhile, the government significantly increased its gold reserve. If somebody had written a book prior to this happening, nobody would have believed it. But it happened. The USA only allowed citizens to own gold again some 30 years later in just 1974. Although I do have faith in gold, God's money, I don't have faith in governments not to strip it from me, and I'm also not excited by something that makes me zero yields. Cryptocurrency, the people's money. Cryptocurrencies are digital or virtual currencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Litecoin. And many people laughed when cryptocurrencies first became widely known because they deemed Bitcoin as silly fake money. It's actually quite the opposite. Bitcoin has made tens of thousands of people millionaires in the last decade and has outperformed just about any other investment. It has far outperformed property, gold, and almost every company in the stock market. Let's be clear, not all crypto coins are the same. Many have failed and people have lost millions. If you see an influencer promoting their new coin, be very careful because many are used as pump and dump schemes. I own a fair amount of Bitcoin and Ethereum, but I rarely look at it. Like most investments, they'll go up, they'll go down in value. The key is to choose a coin you believe in long term, invest, and don't look at it daily. When emotions are high, intelligence is low. Blockchain is the underlying technology that makes crypto possible. It is a decentralized ledger that records all transactions across a network of computers. Every participant can see the transaction history and no processing fees are charged when taking or receiving payments. It can be used for so much more than storing cryptocurrencies, such as supply chain management, smart contracts, voting systems, healthcare records, and more. As well as being able to make immediate payments with no processing fees all across the world with no banker mediating the payments, cryptocurrencies are not controlled by any central banks or government. Hence, why many people refer to cryptocurrency as the people's money. Many of these coins have a limited number that can ever be in existence. This type of coin cannot be printed in the way that traditional money has been, meaning that it is scarce and therefore likely to hold its value. The stock market. Shares in corporations. Investing money into the stock market means purchasing shares in a publicly traded company such as Amazon, Apple, Tesla, and thousands of other companies that you believe will grow. These sorts of large blue chip companies choose to go public in order to expand using investor finance, which means ordinary people can have a slice of the pie. If you invest in one share at Amazon, this might cost you £180, and it means you're now a tiny part owner of Amazon. This means that if the company doubles in value, your £180 is now worth £360. You doubled your money. And on top of this, every time the board of directors want to receive a dividend, you'll be entitled to a tiny dividend too. Your percentage will be in proportion with your shareholding, but this means you can benefit from capital growth at the same time as receiving some cash flow. Many of my friends invest in companies like Starbucks, and then they use the dividends from Starbucks to get their drinks at Starbucks, and they call it their free Starbucks drink. Whilst this is cute for investing small amounts of money, I wouldn't recommend putting more money than you can comfortably afford to lose into one given company. I personally invest in the stock market, but rather than picking companies or using expensive financial advisors, I invest into the Standard & Poor's 500, S&P 500. This is where your investment is spread between the largest publicly traded companies in the USA in various different sectors and industries. This means that instead of investing £180 in Amazon, one share at Amazon, I can invest £180 spread across all the top 500 companies all at once, including Tesla, Google, Meta. Every few months, the index will be updated, removing weaker performing companies and replacing them with safer bets. The S&P 500 usually outperforms picking stocks, even when you have a financial planner working on your behalf. This is probably the most passive investment in the world that requires no skill or effort from the investor. I'm confident that the government will never seize your money from the stock market because the big companies would never allow it. Unless they made owning a company illegal, it will be near impossible for governments to prevent investors investing in companies. There'd be no reason for them to ever do it, and it would be not tolerated. Property investment. Real estate, real asset wealth. When reading through the Sunday Times Rich List, a public list of the wealthiest individuals or families in the UK, it's clear to see that the super rich choose property as their primary way of storing wealth. Despite the government's ploy to prevent ordinary folk from becoming property investors, 60% of the UK's entire net wealth is invested in property, with over 1/4 of the wealthiest people in Britain having property listed as their primary source of wealth. Even companies that have got nothing to do with property and make their money through an unrelated business are likely to invest the majority of their profits in property. McDonald's make most of their money through property. The vast majority of my personal wealth is also in property. I do this in my personal name, my wife's name, private pensions, trust funds, and multiple different companies. I own a finance company that loans money into other property investment deals, and this is where 90% of my wealth is stored. It's practically impossible for them to strip you of your property ownership. When Andrew Tate was thrown into prison in 2022-2023, they froze his bank, stole his cryptocurrency, seized all of his expensive supercars, but they didn't take his properties from him. And whilst the government desperately tries to prevent the general public from investing too heavily in property by using disincentives like taxation and by influencing mainstream media, the news tells us properties will crash. Meanwhile, property prices continue to rise year after year and have done for hundreds of years. Tax rules are hard hitting for small-time landlords, but there are always loopholes because ultimately the super rich own properties themselves. I put a percentage of my taxable business profits into a private SAS pension, small self-administered scheme, which means I pay no personal tax because it didn't go to me personally, it went into my pension. I pay no corporation tax because investing in a pension is seen as a fully tax-deductible expense. My pension can now invest that money tax-free into commercial properties such as land, warehouses, and hotels. All of the profit from these commercial properties goes into my pension, which is tax-free. Unlike gold, property can generate huge cash flow month by month. While you're waiting for it to increase in appreciation, you're receiving a monthly passive income from your tenants. Property is my favorite asset class due to the cash flow it gives me. That's why real estate is known as real asset wealth. Your fiat money in the bank is at risk like never before. Not only is it shrinking in value due to the constant inflation as the government prints more and more money, it's easily exposed should the banks freeze your account or worse. Fiat money will be crashed to zero in the Great Reset. Therefore, it's wise to consider storing your wealth in real assets such as stocks, gold, cryptocurrency, and property. And after years of study and research, I've come to the conclusion that the safest and strongest asset class is property investment. House prices and house values are not the same thing. My great-grandma was born in 1925, when the average price of a house in Britain was around £500. Now, the same houses are 275 grand. That's over 500 times more expensive just throughout my grandma's lifetime. Houses are not the only thing that have skyrocketed in price. Just about everything has. I used to go shopping on the way to school with 20 pence, and that was enough to buy a chocolate bar or some sweets. So why is everything going up in value? The answer is that it isn't. The value doesn't have to change for the price to increase. When people say that houses double in value every 10 years, you could argue that they don't. House prices tend to double every 10 years, that's undeniable, but house values? No. House prices are subjective depending on what type of money you're talking about. The only reason prices go up in relation to the British pound is because the British pound is losing value every time the government prints more money. If you owned 200 gold coins in 1924, that'll be enough to buy a house. And today, if you owned the same 200 gold coins, that would also buy a similar house today. Therefore, if you saved gold instead of saving cash, then inflation wouldn't affect you. The only reason people are broke today is because they work for and save cash, fake money that's being printed. The media is obsessed with house prices. They print stories about house prices almost as much as the Bank of England prints money. But you must remember, house prices are subjective depending on what currency of money you're referring to. You must also remember the owner of the media outlets are very rich. They write the articles in the full knowledge that you will base your financial decisions from these articles. And most people are like sheep. They believe what they read and they don't do their own due diligence. The system is rigged to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. In 2020, the government locked everybody inside their houses, required everybody to wear masks, and closed down most small businesses from trading. And this lasted for around 18 months. And as a result, people went into financial panic and we went into a recession. A recession is defined as when a country's GDP, gross domestic product, declines for 2 consecutive quarters. It was laughable when they announced that we're in a recession, because it was a completely manufactured recession. Of course, we're spending less money and GDP is down because we're unable to leave our houses. The first 6 months of lockdown was grim, not just for the country, but for the world. In the UK alone, over 500,000 house sales were halted, and we saw a sharp dip in house prices. The media outlets were very negative about property prices and investing, and the general guidance was to hold fire because house prices are about to crash. I was like a lone ranger in the wilderness predicting that house prices were actually about to boom. Everybody laughed at me. I could see firsthand that rich people themselves were buying up properties like they were going out of fashion, including Lloyds Banking Group. The Bank of England printed hundreds of billions of pounds during the pandemic and lowered base rate twice in March First from 0.75% to 0.25%, and then just 2 days later to a staggering 0.1%. And this was the lowest base rate ever been from the beginning of central banks coming into existence. This meant that in 2020, you could borrow money from the banks almost with zero interest, 0.1. How base rate works is that the Bank of England loans its printed money to other banks at base rate. And then the banks lend that same printed money to their customers at a higher amount to make a profit. In 2020, you could get a mortgage fixed as low as 1.5%. This means if you took out a mortgage for £100,000, your monthly interest payments would be £125. During this time, I refinanced a large chunk of my property portfolio for 5 to 7 years at 3.3% fixed, in the knowledge that rates would increase. The longer you fix the term, the higher the rate, because the banks all knew that rates would later increase. Base rate stayed at 0.1% for almost 2 years, and house prices skyrocketed. Many people missed this 2020-2021 boom because they'd read too many news articles scaremongering about a property crash. But that came later. After the boom will always follow a crash, and after a crash will always follow a boom. In 2022, 2023, just as the general public began to realize that it was a good time to buy property again, the base rate went from 0.25 to 5.75. I felt sorry for all the people that had not fixed their interest rates for 5 years or beyond. It suddenly became impossible for people to afford their monthly mortgage payments, and many people went into negative equity. Their properties became liabilities. They weren't even able to sell them because the mortgage was higher than the value of the house. Because the market came crashing down. Many people went bankrupt, sold for a huge loss, others lost their houses. The lesson is don't take financial advice from anybody. Instead, just watch what the rich people are actually doing and do the same. At the time of speaking, rates are now coming back down to a more sustainable level of interest. And I know this because the longer you fix your mortgage term, the cheaper the rate. Why? Because banks know that rates will decrease. Good property will always hold its value in the same way that gold will. So don't be blown by the wind and worry about what house prices are doing. Don't let your anchor be rooted in fake money that's continually being printed. Inflation is what happens when you lose the purchasing power of your money. According to the Office of National Statistics, inflation typically is around 5.5% per year over the last 50 years, on average, in the UK. But that figure has often been closer to 10%. In 2022 alone, inflation was 11.1%. That means that if you had £100,000 invested in the stock market and you managed to make a 10% return on your money, you'd still be down over £1,000 negative. If you left £100,000 safely in the bank, then you'd be down to £89,000 in a single year. I don't understand why people leave their money in the bank when they're printing money, because it's losing buying power day by day. And these figures are based straight from the Office of National Statistics, which is owned by the government. In my opinion, inflation is worse than what the Office of National Statistics are even saying. Inflation is subjective to a point because some goods and services increase more than others. These are averages from a whole range of selected chosen goods and services from the government. Therefore, it's possible that the figures are watered down to prevent the public from knowing how drastic inflation crisis really is. The general public is often not financially literate enough to realise that the £100,000 they saved up in 2020 will now only be worth £60,000 in 2025. They know they're broke, but they can't work out why. In the same way, if you receive a pay rise from your boss of 5%, you might have actually taken a pay cut, depending on inflation that year. This is why the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Inflation is wonderful for the rich, but devastating for the poor. Inflation means everything goes up, but if you don't own anything, you only suffer. When inflation went up 11.1% in 2022, everyone was complaining that the costs of goods was going through the roof. Well, literally, the tiles of roofs increased by 40%, and the cost of timber, wood, increased in some cases by 300%. This made me, as a rich person, super happy because I own a lot of timber and I own many roofs. Rents are increasing by 10% every year, which is terrible for tenants, but fantastic if you have a lot of tenants paying rent. What would you do if you retired at the age of 25 through a string of property investments? Well, that's what happened to me. And after retiring, I actually got a little bit bored. I set up a foundation, the Samuel Leeds Foundation. I got into hospitality. I bought several hotels, Stalin Grange, Willingham House. And I also started educating other people in how to successfully invest in property. And since then, I've become one of the most renowned UK property investment mentors. And I used to charge hundreds of pounds for this, but I'm going to be running an online training session completely for free, showing you the exact step-by-steps of how to successfully get into the world of property investment. If that sounds good, you've got everything to gain, nothing to lose. You're probably watching this for a reason right now, so click the link somewhere around this video and I look forward to getting to know you. You are likely to spend the rest of your life struggling financially until the day you die. The system is rigged to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. You must make a decision today to become rich. It doesn't just happen. Let this be a warning to you. This may sound like I'm being dramatic, but the statistics show otherwise. I predicted back in 2016 that being comfortable would quickly become extinct. The world is changing fast, and unless you do something drastic, you and your bloodline will live in poverty. I used to work in food banks, giving food to the destitute. Do you know who used to come? Homeless people. Drug addicts. They'd come and receive free food given by donors. Today, if you volunteer at a food bank, you'll see nurses, waitresses, care workers, call center operators, delivery drivers queuing for food from food banks. At the time of speaking, the average 30-year-old has a total savings of £3,500. That's less than 6 weeks' living costs. The average rent in London is £2,100 per month. How is that affordable for the average person? This is why even people with good jobs are forced to live in house chairs, tiny studios, or at home with their parents. The average take-home salary in London is only £2,800 per month, barely more than the average rent. It's also becoming harder and harder to rent, with agents asking for larger deposits and upfront rent. Utility bill prices are also going up in price. Food, transport, house prices are projected to keep on rising higher and higher. Meanwhile, salaries are barely rising. This is comparable to feudal times where peasants would be given a humble place to sleep, eat and drink in exchange for a lifetime of labor and sweat. The only difference now is that people are given a humble salary but have to find their own place to sleep, eat and drink in exchange for a lifetime of labor and sweat. People are retiring later and later in life because the system has been redesigned for us to work until we die. Old age pensioners are retiring only to realize that pensions they invested in their entire working lives are only worth £137 per week. The government is not coming to save you from this reality, and it is only going to get worse and worse. Artificial intelligence is going to take away most people's jobs, leaving millions of people redundant and unable to cover their bills, being forced to sell their houses, downsize, and degrade their quality of life. Your parents' advice of getting a good job for life doesn't cut it anymore. In today's generation, the average person changes jobs on average every 2 to 3 years. And this will get more extreme with AI taking your jobs. Even if you're in a really good job and saving £1,000 every single month, it would take 25 years to have enough money to buy an average £300,000 house. By the time you've saved up the money, the house price would probably be £1 million, meaning that you'll be forever saving but getting nowhere. I recently watched a fly trying to escape out of my office window. It was repeatedly banging into the window, hoping to break through. If only the fly had known that the window was open, it just needed to change strategy. It could have been free within a second. In the same way, you are working so hard in your job, hoping to break into financial freedom, but you won't. So you need to change strategy. Only a few will actually change strategy and become free. When you go to Asda, you no longer interact with a human being because a machine is smart enough to take your payment. Only when you get stuck or a complex issue comes up does a senior employee come to help. Mindless employees are no longer required. The way to survive over the coming months and years is to get extremely efficient. Do not be scared of AI taking your job. Let AI become your servant so you can do a far superior job. The one job that AI will struggle to replace the most is sales. Human beings are intrinsically far more likely to be persuaded to buy from another human being than they are from a robot or a machine. And it's proven that it's much easier to sell expensive services to rich people than cheap services to poor people. Money is like water. There's something known as the water cycle that proves that water is always moving. It flows through rivers, evaporates into the clouds, then rains back down. The cycle repeats. If you stand in the rain, you're guaranteed to get wet. Money's the same. And we have something known as the money cycle. If you position yourself where the money is flowing, you're guaranteed to get rich. The reason people are poor is because they work for money. Instead of letting money flow to them and through them, money is always moving. Your job is to stand in the way. I became a cash millionaire by age 25 from sourcing property investment deals and passing them on to investors for a 2% finder's fee. I always got paid up front, always delivered and sold hundreds of deals. The best deals were cherry-picked for me. Now I own an extremely large portfolio of properties that has not only changed my life, but will change the lives of my family history. I've also trained thousands of my students to do the exact same thing, often buying deals from them myself. This is the best strategy to generate fast income with the lowest overheads to getting started. It's not passive, but it's massive. The average property is around £300,000. If you charge a small 2% fee and sold just one deal per week, that'd be an income of £24,000 per month. In order to begin doing this, you just need 4 things: the ability to find good deals, a network of investors, legal contracts, and the skill set to close the deal. I received a message recently from a 16-year-old kid called Kane from Chester. He had no money, was diagnosed with cancer, but was keen to learn the art of deal selling and making money. I invited him to come along to my £1 crash course with his parents. Kane came along with his grandma, and she took a personal loan out for him to join my advanced training. Within 4 weeks, he'd made £11,500 from selling 3 property investment deals to investors that he met on the training. Kane's now escaped the matrix, and he's now cancer-free. If a 16-year-old can do this, you can too. But if you were my best friend or my closest family member, I'd urge you to learn the skills of deal sourcing and making quick cash. Regardless of what happens to the future of money, there'll always be rich investors looking for bargain, lucrative investment properties. The fastest way to become financially free is by using the Premier Inn model. Financial freedom is when your recurring passive income exceeds your monthly living expenses. If it costs you $5,000 a month to live comfortably, then you must have a passive income of $5,000 a month that's set up on autopilot and rolls in while you sleep. Once you've achieved this, the next goal is ultimate financial freedom. This is where your passive income covers your desired lifestyle, which could be 10 to 20 grand a month. Once you've achieved this, you are completely free. The goal is not just to earn more money, but to generate a completely different type of money. If you don't believe in passive income, then you're paying for somebody else's passive income. The most expensive overhead for the average person is their rent. And that's why you must own properties yourself to rent them out. Not necessarily own property, but have property. The largest companies in the world today understand the power of control. The largest hotel business in the world is Airbnb, but they don't own any hotels. Get the idea? I wouldn't advise taking on a large hotel for your first deal, trying to make £1 million revenue a year. I'd start with a small, single studio apartment. Once you've proven the concept, made £1,000 a month from one apartment, got a couple, then build up to bigger deals. Even young people with bad credit and no references have managed to find tired landlords who give them a shot when they learn the art of how to sell and, of course, how to deliver. Brainwashed slaves and sheep usually find excuses to stay poor. They can't afford the upfront rent. They don't have the skills to get the landlords on side. Their family won't support them. The list goes on and on and on. The sad reality is that everybody can become financially free, but not everybody will. I recently launched a new training day in London and received a message from a young man on Instagram saying, "I can't get to London as I don't have transport, but when are you next coming to Croydon?" I responded, "People travel from all over the world to attend my training. If you're so stoppable that you can't get to London from Croydon, then you will never be successful in business. There'll be many obstacles and hurdles. This is the first one." He never responded and didn't come to the seminar. I'm glad he didn't come, because if he had come, he'd have lowered my ratio of success students. Instead of waiting for your property to increase in value over time, you can force it up in value using many strategies. The most common way to increase the value is to buy broken properties and then repair them. This is called buy, refurbish, refinance, rent. Right now, you might be thinking, where are these magical property deals? It's normal to think this way because you've never seen one before. When I bought my new gold Range Rover, I'd never seen one before. Now, annoyingly, I see them all the time. Not because there's more on the road, but because my mind is programmed to spot them. This is the same for property deals. Best deals come from agents. The best way to build relationships with agents is to buy from them. Once you're a player in the game, your success will snowball as you get better at identifying projects and have too many deals to handle. The good news is that you can sell some of your opportunities to other investors for a fee. If the deal is too good to sell, you could partner with other investors and share the profits. Conclusion: the fastest way to become financially free is to study deal sourcing, rent to rent, and BRRR. Once you have these valuable skill sets in your toolbox, you'll become extremely valuable in the marketplace and you'll never be able to work a 9-to-5 job again. I've helped thousands of people escape the rat race, and I've personally used these strategies to make millions of pounds myself. The reason I teach people today is because I make money from collaborating with my students, and I gain a lot of satisfaction from helping others. When you get to the top of the mountain, it's fun pulling others up to join you.